He found her sitting all alone on a subway train, knees pulled up, eyes too tired for a child her age. Said her belly was moving, and her uncle had left her there. That one moment set off a fight for her safety, her future, and her right to be loved by someone who wouldn't ever let her go. Before we dive into this, hit the subscribe button and tell us from where in the world you're watching from. New York City, winter of '09. The kind of cold that chews through bones and makes honest men think dishonest thoughts. The subway tunnels ran like arteries through the city's belly, pumping blood and dreams and nightmares from borough to borough. And down in Platform 7, the forgotten platform that most maps don't even show, that's where Max Campbell first heard the sound that would change everything. The whimper of a child, lost in that concrete belly of the beast. Now, most folks walk right past pain in this city. Got to, really. Otherwise, the weight of all that suffering would crush a man flatter than yesterday's newspaper. But Max? He had a sister once, little Sarah Campbell, 6 years old with pigtails that bounced when she laughed. Vanished from their front yard in Detroit when Max was 14. Left behind nothing but an empty swing and a hole in his heart big enough to drive a freight train through 20-3 years on the force. And Max still heard Sarah's laugh in every crying child. Still saw her face in every missing person report. Some might call it a curse. I call it grace, the kind that keeps a man's heart soft when the world's trying its best to turn it to stone. The little ghost sat huddled against the grimy tile wall, knees pulled up to her chest, like she waist-trained to disappear into herself. Couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7. Wore a unicorn coat that might have been pink once upon a time, before the city got its hands on it. Her hair hung in dirty tangles, and those eyes. Lord help me, those eyes were older than any child's ought to. Max approached slow, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. Crouched down till he was eye level, kept his hands visible, voice soft as Sunday morning. Hey there, sweetheart. You okay? The child looked up, and Max felt something crack inside his chest. Those weren't just tears. On her face, they were the kind of tears that come from deep wells of hurt, the kind that ain't got no bottom. Maggie, she whispered, voice barely louder than a prayer. My name's Maggie. That's a beautiful name, Maggie. I'm Max. He pointed to his badge, let the overhead light sketch the metal. I'm a police officer. Are you lost? She nodded, wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve. Uncle Bobby said to wait right here. Dot said he'd be back soon. Max felt that familiar twist in his gut, the one that told him something was wrong, terribly wrong. How long you been waiting, honey? Maggie held up 3 fingers, then thought about it and held up a 4th. This many days, maybe more. I lost count 4 days. A 6-year-old girl, alone in the subway tunnels for 4 days. Max's training kicked in check for injuries, assess the situation, call for backup. But his heart? His heart was already breaking for this little one who'd been abandoned like yesterday's garbage. Are you hungry, Maggie? She nodded so hard her whole body shook. Max reached into his jacket, pulled out a granola bar he'd been saving for later. Watched her tear into it like she hadn't eaten in, well, maybe she hadn't. Uncle Bobby left me some special vitamins, she said between bites. Said they'd keep me strong till he got back. But they make my tummy hurt something awful. Max's blood turned to ice water. What kind of vitamins, sweetheart? Maggie reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small plastic bag filled with blue pills, little blue candies, she called them. But Max had been on the narcotics beat long enough to know fentanyl when he saw it. Enough in that bag to kill a grown man twice over. And this child, this precious, broken child, had been swallowing them like Skittles. Maggie, honey, I need you to come with me, okay? We're going to go somewhere safe, somewhere warm. And there's gonna be some nice doctors who want to make sure you're feeling all right. She looked up at him with those ancient eyes, and Max saw something that near broke him in half. Hope. After 4 days of abandonment, after God knows what kind of abuse, this little girl still had hope flickering in her eyes, like a candle in a hurricane. "Will you stay with me?" she asked, reaching up with one small hand. Max took that hand in his, felt how cold it was, how small, how fragile, and made a promise that would change both their lives forever. "I ain't going nowhere, little angel. I ain't going nowhere." As they walked toward the subway exit, Max heard Maggie humming under her breath. Some melody he didn't recognize, soft and sweet and heartbreaking. He looked down at her, this tiny warrior who'd survived 4 days in hell, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, real purpose. But across town, in a flophouse that smelled of meth and broken dreams, Uncle Bobby was cleaning his gun and laughing at something on the television. Laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. Asterisk. St. Mary's emergency room at 2:47 a.m. looked like a battlefield. Gunshot victims bleed in agonies, overdoses convulsing in their restraints, and the walking wounded lined up like soldiers waiting for their turn at resurrection. But when Max carried Maggie through those doors, her tiny frame barely weighing more than a bag of groceries, the whole place seemed to stop and take notice. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been pulling double shifts for 3 days straight, running on coffee and stubbornness. She'd seen everything the city could throw at her knife wounds. Domestic violence, children beaten within an inch of their lives. But something about the little girl in the unicorn coat made her stop in her tracks. "What do we have?" she asked Max, already reaching for her stethoscope. 6-year-old, been on her own for 4 days. Found her in the subway with these. Max held up the bag of blue pills, watched Dr. Vasquez's expression shift from concern to horror. Sweet Jesus, get her to Trauma Bay 3. Now. What followed was 40 minutes of controlled chaos. Stomach pumping, 4 lines, blood work that would make a grown man weep. Maggie bore it all with the kind of quiet dignity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Held Max's hand through every needle stick, every painful procedure, trusting him with a faith that humbled him to his core. "The good news," Dr. Vasquez said later, peeling off her gloves outside the trauma bay, "is that most of the drugs are still in her system. We got to her before they could do permanent damage. The bad news?" She paused, looked through the window at Maggie, who was finally sleeping peaceful for the first time in days. "This wasn't an accident, Officer Campbell. Those pills were wrapped in slow dissolve coating. Someone was using this child as a drug mule, a living, breathing courier." Max felt rage build in his chest like steam in a kettle. Not the hot, quick anger that burns itself out, the cold, methodical kind that plans and waits and never forgets. Any idea who this Uncle Bobby might be? Dr. Vasquez shook her head. "Child Services is on their way. They'll take her into protective custody while they investigate." No, the word came out harder than Max intended. What I mean is, she's been through enough trauma. Can't she stay with me? Just till they figure things out? The doctor studied Max's face, saw something there that made her soften around the edges. "You got kids, Officer Campbell?" "No, ma'am." "Never had the chance? Foster parent experience? Training?" Max thought about lying, thought about telling her what she wanted to hear. But Maggie had been lied to enough for one lifetime. "None at all. Doc, but I got something better than training. I got investment." Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, watching Maggie sleep through the window. The child had one thumb in her mouth, the other hand clutched around a teddy bear some nurse had given her. "I'll make some calls," she said finally. "But Officer Campbell? If Child Services says no?" They won't, Max said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. They can't. 3 hours later, as dawn painted the hospital windows pink and gold, a woman in an expensive suit walked into the waiting room. Margaret Thornton, Child Protective Services, looked like stepped out of a law office advertisement. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, briefcase that probably cost more than Max made in a month. Officer Campbell, I'm here about the child. Max stood, straightened his rumpled uniform. She's got a name. Maggie. Miss Thornton's smile was professional, cold as February rain. Of course. Well, we've Jet replacement with the McGuire family. They have extensive experience with traumatized children. What about me? You? Her eyebrows went up like Max had suggested something obscene. Officer Campbell, you're not qualified for emergency foster care. No training, no background checks, no homesteady, and frankly, a single man living alone. She didn't finish the sentence, but Max heard the implication loud and clear. In her world, love wasn't enough. Good intentions weren't enough. All that mattered was paperwork and protocols and making sure all the right boxes got checked. She asked me to stay with her, Max said quietly. First thing she said to me, will you stay with him? Ms. Thornton's expression softened just a fraction. I understand you formed an attachment, Officer Campbell. But what's best for you isn't necessarily what's best for the child. The McGuires have a lovely home, other foster children for socialization, access to counseling services, ... They got love? The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a dying fire. Miss Thornton opened her mouth to answer, then closed. It again, ... From inside the trauma bay came a sound that made them both turn. Maggie was awake, crying for Max. Not screaming or throwing a tantrum, just crying in that broken way that children cry when they think they've been abandoned all over again. Max looked at Miss Thornton, saw her wavering. Just let me talk to her. 5 minutes. She nodded, stepped aside. Max pushed through the door, and Maggie's arms were around his neck before he could say a word. I thought you left, she whispered against his shirt. I thought you left like Uncle Bobby. Max held her close, breathed in the smell of hospital soap and something unique will image strawberries, and innocence and hope that refused to die. I told you, little angel, I ain't going nowhere. Promise? Max looked through the window at Miss Thornton, who was watching this scene with something that might have been envy in her eyes. Made a decision that would change everything. I promise. When? He walked back into the hallway 20 minutes later. Miss Thornton was gone. In her place stood Dr. Vasquez, holding a manila folder thick as a phone book. Emergency custody hearing is set for tomorrow morning, she said. Judge Martinez, courtroom 42. You'll need a lawyer. Max took the folder, felt the weight of it in his hands. Don't suppose you know any good ones? Dr. Vasquez smiled the first. Genuine smile Max had seen from her all night. As a matter of fact, I do. My sister Rosa, she specializes in family law, does a lot of pro bono work, owes me a favor or two. Max felt something that might have been hope staring in his chest. Think she'd be willing to take in a hopeless case? Officer Campbell, Dr. Vasquez said, looking back at Maggie, who was drawing pictures on the back of a medical chart. In my experience, the only hopeless cases are the ones where nobody cares. Enough to fight. She paused at the door, turned back. That little girl in there? She's got somebody fighting for her now. That makes her one of the lucky ones. As the doctor walked away, Max opened the folder and started reading. Court documents, psychological evaluations, background check requirements. Enough red tape to strangle an elephant. But buried in all that bureaucratic nonsense was something that made Max's heart skip a beat. A single line, handwritten in Dr. Vasquez's careful script. Recommend placement with Officer Campbell pending further investigation. Child has formed significant attachment. Separation trauma contraindicated. Max felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. In his 23 years on the force, he'd learned that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear scrubs and work 18-hour shifts and believe in miracles, even when the world's given them every reason not to. He walked back into the trauma bay, where Maggie was putting the finishing touches on her drawing. It showed two stick figures, one big, one small, holding hands outside a house with own window. "That's us," she said, holding it up for Max to see. "That's our house." Max took the drawing, studied it like it was the Mona Lisa. "It's beautiful." "Sweetheart, just beautiful. Will we really have a house? Just you and me?" Max looked into those ancient, hopeful eyes and made another promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "We're sure gonna try, little angel. We're sure gonna try." But in a warehouse across town, Uncle Bobby was pacing like a caged animal, making phone calls to people who didn't like to be disappointed. People who expected their investments to pay off, one way or another. And in a mansion on the Upper East Side, Harrison Van Derlen was reading the morning paper, sipping coffee from a cup worth more than most people's cars. When he got to the story a Booth little girl found in the subway, he set down his cup and reached for his phone. "Margaret? It's Harrison. I saw the story in the Times. About the little girl? Yes, that's the one. I want you to call the judge. Tell him the Van Derlen Foundation would like to discuss placement options." The game was about to change, and Max Campbell didn't even know he was playing it. Asterisk. Judge Maria Martinez had been on the family court bench for 15 years, long enough to see the worst of humanity parade through her courtroom, wearing their Sunday best and their weekday lies. She'd seen children fought over like prized possessions, love twisted into legal strategy, and good intentions paved with the broken dreams of families that never quite fit together. But this case was different. She could feel it in the way everyone in courtroom 42 was sitting a little straighter, paying a little more attention. Even the court reporter, who'd seen everything twice, kept glancing over at the little girl in the front row. Maggie sat between Max and Rosa Vasquez, Dr. Vasquez's sister, who'd agreed to represent them pro bono. The child wore a new dress, yellow, with little flowers on it that some kin nurse had bought her from the hospital gift shop. Her hair was clean and braided, held back with a butterfly clip that caught the courtroom lights like captured sunshine. But it was her eyes that told the real story. Still too old, still too careful, but with something new flickering in them. Trust, the dangerous, beautiful kind of trust that children give to adults who promise not to break it. "Your Honor," Margaret Thornton stood at the plaintiff's table, her briefcase open like a mouthful of teeth. "While we appreciate Officer Campbell's enthusiasm for this case, we must consider what's truly in the best interest of the child. The McGuire family has a proven track record with traumatized children, a stable home environment, and the resources necessary for long-term care. Rosa Vasquez was a woman built for battle, 5 feet, nothing in her stocking feet, but with a voice that could cut glass and a heart that bled for every underdog who walked through her door. She stood to address the court, and Max felt a little of his fear ease away. "Your Honor, with respect to Miss Thornton's concerns, we're not talking about what looks good in paper. We're talking about a child who's already suffered abandonment trauma, who's found safety and security with Officer Campbell. To separate them now would be not just cruel, but potentially damaging to her psychological development." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Ms. Vasquez, while the court appreciates Officer Campbell's heroic actions in finding and rescuing this child, foster care placement requires more than good intentions. What can you tell me about his qualifications?" Rosa had coached Max for this moment, prepared him for every question, every angle of attack. But before she could answer, The courtroom doors opened with a sound like thunder. Harrison Van Derlin walked in like he owned the place, which, considering the donations his family had made to various city charities over the years, he might as well have. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Max's car. Behind him walked his wife, Catherine, a woman so perfectly put together she looked like she'd been assembled by committee. And behind them, a lawyer who looked like he ate smaller lawyers for breakfast. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, not bothering to wait for permission to speak, "I'm Andrew Blackwood, representing the Van Derlin family. We'd like to request permission to intervene in these proceedings." Judge Martinez's eyebrows went up. "On what grounds, Mr. Blackwood?" "The Van Derlin Foundation has extensive experience in child welfare. We've successfulized over 300 at-risk children in loving homes over the past decade. We believe we can offer this child opportunities that neither the state system nor ... double quotes, he glanced dismissively at Max, ... well-meaning but unqualified individuals simply cannot provide." Max felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't about what was best for McGee anymore. This was about money, about power, about people who thought love was something you could buy with a generous donation and a tax write-off. "Your Honor." Rosa stood again. "While we're sure the Van Derlin family means well, this child has already formed a significant attachment to Officer Campbell. She's been through enough Roma without being treated like a prize to be won by whoever has the deepest pockets." Harrison Van Derlin leaned forward, whispered something to his lawyer. Blackwood nodded, pulled out a folder thick as a Bible. "Your Honor, if I may present evidence of Officer Campbell's unsuitability for foster care placement." Max's blood ran cold. What evidence? What could they possibly have? Blackwood opened the folder, began reading in a voice like poisoned honey. Traffic citations, 14 in the past 5 years. Reprimands for excessive force, twice in the past 18 months. A gambling addiction that led to significant debt and a second mortgage on his home. Max felt the courtroom spinning around him. Every mistake, every moment of weakness, every private struggle laid bare for everyone to see. How had they gotten this information? How had they dug so deep, so fast? "Additionally," Blackwood continued, "we have testimony from several of Officer Campbell's colleagues questioning his emotional stability, his tendency toward violent outbursts, his inappropriate attachment to this case. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. Every truth twisted just enough to sound damning, every weakness magnified until it looked like a fatal flaw." Max saw Judge Martinez's expressions changing, saw doubt creeping in like fog through. A broken window, but then something happened that nobody expected. Maggie stood up. 7 years old, barely tall enough to see over the gallery rail, but she stood up in that courtroom like she was 10 feet tall and made of pure courage. "Your Honor?" Her voice was small, but it carried to every corner of that room. "Can I say something?" Judge Martinez looked surprised. Children almost never spoke in custody hearings. But something in Maggie's eyes, something in the way she held herself, made the judge nod. "You may approach the bench, sweetheart." Maggie walked forward, her little feet clicking on the marble floor. When she reached the judge's bench, she had to stand on her tiptoes to be seen. "Your Honor, I know I'm just a kid. I know I don't understand all them big words them lawyers are using. But I understand scared. I understand alone. And I understand safe." She turned, pointed at Max with one small finger. "That man made me safe. When I was crying in that dark place, when I thought nobody cared if I lived or died, he found me. He stayed with me. He promised he wouldn't leave, and he kept that promise." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. "I don't need a big fancy house," Maggie continued. I don't need piano lessons or a trust fund or whatever else them rich folks are promising. I need somebody who'll hold my hand when I have nightmares. I need somebody who'll read me bedtime stories and make sure I eat my vegetables and tell me I'm good even when I mess up. She turned back to Judge Martinez, and Max saw tears in the judge's eyes. That man right there, he already does all them things. He already loves me. Not because of Samidi's paying him to, not because it looks good in the newspaper, just because. Maggie walked back to where Max was sitting, climbed into his lap like she belonged there, wrapped her small arms around his neck and whispered something that only he could hear. I choose you, Max. I choose you. Judge Martinez was quiet for a long moment, looking at the scene in front of her. A row around the edges cop and a little girl who'd survived hell, holding each other like they were the last two people on earth. Mr. Blackwood, she said finally, while I'm sure the Van Derlin family has the best of intentions, this court's primary concern is the welfare of the child. And it's clear to me that this child has already found her family. Harrison Van Derlin stood up, his face red with anger. Your Honor, surely you can't be serious. This man is completely unqualified. Mr. Van Derlin. Judge Martinez's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Are you questioning this court's judgment? The rich man looked around the room, saw that public opinion had shifted like sand in a hurricane, saw the way everyone was looking at him, not with respect or admiration, but with something that might have been discussed. He sat down without another word. Emergency custody is awarded to Officer Max Campbell, Judge Martinez announced, her gavel. Fallon like the final word from God. A full hearing will be scheduled within 30 days to determine permanent placement. Max felt tears running down his face, felt Maggie's arms tighten around his neck. In the gallery bendem, Dr. Vasquez was crying too, and even some of the hardened court officers were whipping their eyes. But as they walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun, Max caught sight of Harrison Van Derlin on his cell phone. His face twisted with rage. Rich folks don't like to lose, and they got long memories and longer reach. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. Max's apartment wasn't much to look at. Fourth-floor walk-up in Queens. One bedroom, kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The kind of place where the radiator clanked all winter and the air conditioner wheezed all summer. But when he carried Maggie across that threshold for the first time, it felt like a palace. This is home? She asked, looking around with wide eyes. This is home, Max confirmed, setting her down gently. You're home, too, if you want it to be. Maggie walked through the small space like she was exploring a cathedral, touched the couch where Max slept most nights, peered into the bedroom that would be hers, stood for a long moment in front of the window that looked out over the city. It's perfect, she said finally, and Max felt his heart swell up like a balloon. They spent that first evening like any family might, ordered pizza, watched cartoons, talked about tomorrow. Max tucked Maggie into his bed. He'd sleep on the couch till he could get her proper furniture, read her a story from a book he'd bought on the way home. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her small hand curled around his finger, Max felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Real peace. But peace is a fragile thing in this world, and there are always wolves circling just outside the firelight, waiting for their chance to strike. The next morning, while Maggie was still sleeping, Max got a call that changed everything. Campbell, it's Detective Morrison, downtown precinct. We got a problem. Max stepped onto the fire escape so he wouldn't wake Maggie. What kind of problem? Remember that Uncle Bobby from the subway case? Real name Robert Torino. We been tracking him for months, part of a bigger operation. Turns out your little girl was just one piece of a very ugly puzzle. Morrison's voice was grim, the tone of a cop who'd seen too much and slept too little. Toranawa's running kids as drug mules. Had a whole network of 'em, some as young as 4 years old. We found his base of operations yesterday apartment in the Bronx that looked like something of a nightmare. Max felt that familiar cold settle in his stomach. How many kids? 7 that we know of, all in various stages of conditioning. Some been missing for months. And Campbell? They all knew Maggie. Called her the lucky one, 'cause she got away. Max closed his eyes, tried to push away the images that were forming in his head. 7 children, stolen from their families, turned into living drug capsules by a monster wearing a human face. Where's Torino now? That's the problem. He's in the wind. Could be anywhere. But here's the thing word on Fest Street, is he's not. Brunnin's scared. He's coming back for the girl. The phone felt heavy in Max's hand. What do you mean, coming back? Seems Maggie wasn't just any mule. She was his special project. Been grooming her for something big, something that would have made him rich enough to retire. And he ain't happy about losing his investment. Max looked through the window at Maggie, still sleeping peaceful in his bed, and felt rage build in his chest like steam in a pressure cooker. This child had been through enough. She'd found safety, found love, found a home. And now some piece of garbage wanted to drag her back into hell? What do you need from me? Max asked. We need bait, Morrison said quietly. We need to draw him out, get him someplace where we can take him down clean. And the only thing he wants bad enough to risk exposure is that little girl. Max was quiet for a long moment, watching Maggie sleep, watching the way the morning light painted her face like something out of a Renaissance painting. No, he said finally. Absolutely not. I won't use her as bait. I won't put her at risk. Campbell, listen to me. This guy ain't gonna give up. He's gonna keep coming, keep trying, till he gets what he wants. At least this way, we control the situation. We can protect her. I said no, Morrison. Find another way. Max ended the call, went back. Inside. Maggie was awake now, sitting up in bed with her hair sticking up every which way. Morning, sunshine, Max said, forcing a smile. You hungry? But Maggie wasn't fooled. Children who've lived through trauma develop a sixth sense for danger, and she could read the worry in Max's eyes like a book. Is Uncle Bobby coming back? She asked quietly. Max sat on the edge of the bed, took her small hands in his big ones. I don't know, little angel, but if he does, I promise you, he ain't gonna hurt you. Not as long as I'm breathin'. Maggie nodded, trusting him with that faith that humbled Max to his core. I know. You promised you wouldn't leave me, and you keep your promises. Later that afternoon, while Maggie was napping, Max went through his desk drawers, looking for something he'd hoped he'd never have to use. Found it tucked between old case files and forgotten photographs. A business card, worn soft around the edges, with a phone number written in faded ink. Vincent Vinny Torino, Robert's older brother, and the black sheep of a family tree that was already pretty dark to begin with. Last Max had heard, Vinny was running a legitimate business security consulting for people who needed problems solved quietly and efficiently. Max dialed the number. Wasn't sure if it would even still work. Yeah? The voice was rough, suspicious. Vinny. Torino? Who's a skin? NYPD. I'm calling about your brother Robert. Long pause. Then, what about him? I got something he wants. Something he might do stupid things to get back. I need to know how stupid and how dangerous. Another pause. You the cop took his girl? Max felt his jaw tighten. She ain't his girl. She's a child he was abusing. Look, cop, I ain't gonna pretend my brother's a saint. But family's family, you know. What exactly you want from me? I want to know how far he'll go. Will he come after her? Will he come after me? Vinny was quiet for so long that Max thought the line had gone dead. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. Bobby ain't been right since he got back from Afghanistan. Saw things over there, did things ... came back different. Angry all the time, paranoid, violent. Started using, then started selling, then started ... Well, you know what he started doing. Max waited, let the silence stretch. Thing is, Vinny continued, Bobby don't think like normal people no more. In his head, that little girl belongs to him. Property he paid for with time and effort. And Bobby don't like people talking his property, so he'll come for her. Oh yeah, he'll come. And he'll keep coming till he gets her back, or till somebody stops him permanent-like. Max felt that cold settle deeper in his bones. Any idea where he might be holed up? Could be anywhere. Bobby's got contacts all over the 5 boroughs. But if I was going to guess ... there, single quotes as an old warehouse in Brooklyn, near the docks. Place where we used to play when we was kids. He always goes back there when he's in trouble. Old habits, you know. Vinny gave Max an address, then paused again. Cop, you seem like a good guy, standing up for that kid and all. But you don't know. Bobby like Ito. He ain't gonna just walk away from this. And when he comes, well, just make sure you're ready for war. The line went dead, leaving Max alone with his thoughts and his fears and a little girl who trusted him to keep her safe. That night, after Maggie was asleep, Max sat at his kitchen table and did something he hadn't done since he was a child himself. Prayed not to any particular god or denomination. Max had never been much for organized religion, but to whatever force in the universe looked, after lost children and broken-down cops who'd bitten off more than they could chew. I don't ask for much, he whispered to the darkness. But that little girl in there, she's been through hell already. If you got any mercy left, any miracles tucked away somewhere, now will be a good time to break 'em out. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime symphony sirens and car horns and the distant rumble of subway trains. But somewhere, in that concrete jungle, a monster was moving through the shadows, getting closer with every step. And Max Campbell, a broken-down cop with more heart than sense, was all that stood between Ville and innocence. The reckoning was coming. 3 days after the phone call with Vinny Torino, Max woke up to the sound of glass breaking. He was on his feet before his brain fully processed what was happening. Muscle memory and 23 years of police training kicking in like a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart. The apartment was dark, quiet except for the settling sounds of old wood and older pipes. But that glass break-in hadn't been inside. It came from the fire escape, from the window that faced the alley. Max grabbed his service weapon from the lockbox beside his couch, moved silent as a ghost toward Maggie's room. She was still sleeping, curled up under the blanket that picked out a gather at Walmart purple, with silver stars that she said looked like wishes waiting to come true. Another sound from outside. Footsteps on the fire escape, careful and deliberate. Someone waistrying real hard not to be heard, which meant they weren't supposed to be there in the first place. Max's phone buzzed against his leg text message. Unknown number. I want my property back, pig. Send the girl down, and maybe I don't burn your whole world to the ground. Robert Torino. Had to be. Max felt that familiar rage building in his chest, but this time it was different. This time it was cold, calculated, dangerous. This time it was the rage of a father protecting his child, because that's what Maggie was now, wasn't it? His child. Not by blood, maybe, but by choice, not by love. By the kind of bond that gets forged in fire and sealed with promises that mean morethin. Any piece of paper ever could. Max typed back, come and take her. The response came immediately. Already here. That's when Max heard the second sound different from the first. This one came from the front door. Lockpicks, steady and professional. Torino wasn't alone, and he wasn't messing around. Max moved to Maggie's bedside, shook her gently. "Sweetheart, wake up. We need to go." Her eyes opened instantly, wide and alert. Children who've lived through trauma don't sleep deep. They hover just below the surface, ready to run at a moment's notice. "Uncle Bobby?" she whispered. "Yeah, but don't worry. I got a plan." Max had scouted escape routes from his apartment the day after Morrison's phone call. The some way he'd learned to read a room and watch the exits. Old habits from the street. But they were about to pay off in ways he'd never expected. The building had a back stairwell, one that led down to the basement and out through a service tunnel that connected to the subway system. It wasn't pretty, and it sure wasn't safe, but it was better than staying put and waiting for trouble to come knocking. "Put on your shoes, baby girl." Real quiet now. Maggie moved like a little shadow, grabbing her sneakers and the teddy bear that had become her constant companion since the hospital. Max threw some clothes in a backpack, grabbed his phone and his weapon, and every bit of courage he could muster. The front door handle rattled. They were out of time. Max scooped Maggie up in his arms, felt her wrap her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck. She was shaking like a leaf, but she didn't make a sound. Brave little soldier, ready to follow wherever he led. They made it to the back stairwell just as the front door opened. Max heard voices, at least 2 women, maybe 3. Heard furniture being overturned, drawers being pulled out and dumped on the floor. Where are they? Torino's voice, rough and angry and full of the kind of hate that poisons everything it touches. Must have rabbited. Check the fire escape. Max moved down the stairs as fast as he dared, Maggie's weight in his arms familiar and precious. 4 flights. Down, then through a door that opened onto the basement. A maze of offices and electrical boxes and forgotten storage rooms that smelled like mold and broken dreams. The service tunnel was in the northwest corner, hidden behind a false wall that Max had discovered during a building inspection years ago. Emergency exit in case of fire or flood or whatever other disasters might befall an old building in Queens. He set Maggie down, moved the false panel aside. The tunnel beyond was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for a grown man. But it led to the subway system, and from there they could disappear into the arteries of the city. "I don't like dark places," Maggie whispered. Max knelt down, looked her in the eye. "I know, little angel. But remember what I told you. Sometimes we gotta go through the dark to get to the light. And I'll be right here with you every step of this way." She nodded, trusting him with that faith that never seemed to waver, no matter how bad things get. They crawled through the tunnel, Max in front with a small flashlight, Maggie right behind him, following the narrow beam of light like it was the North Star itself. 20 minutes of crawling through dust and debris, 20 minutes of trying not to think about what they were going to do when they reached the other end. The tunnel opened onto an abandoned section of subway platform, one that hadn't seen a train in 15 years, but still connected to the active system through a series of maintenance walkways. They climbed out, rushed the dirt off their clothes. Maggie looked around at the empty platform, at the graffiti-covered walls and the rats scurrying in the shadows. "Where do we go now?" she asked. Max pulled out his phone, dialed Detective Morrison. "We got a problem. Torino found us. We're in the tunnels near." The phone went dead. No signal down here, too far underground for the towers to reach. They were on their own. Max thought about their options. They could try to make it to the nearest active station, flag down a train, disappear into the city above. But Torino would be watching the exits, waiting for them to surface. And Max only had so much ammunition, so much fight left in him. or they could do what Torino wouldn't expect. They could go deeper. Maggie, I need you to be very brave for me. Can you do that? She nodded, squeezed his hand. I'm always brave. With you. Max felt his heart break just a little at the trust in her voice. This child, who'd been abandoned and abused and used as a living drug mule, still believed in him. Still trusted him to keep her safe when her whole world was falling apart. They walked deeper into the tunnel system, following maintenance signs that pointed toward the central hub. Max had been down here before, years ago, chasing a suspect who'd tried to lose himself in the maze of tracks and tunnels that ran beneath the city. He knew there were security stations down here, places where transit cops monitored the system and coordinated with NYPD when things went sideways. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Multiple sets, moving fast and angry. Torino and his crew had found the tunnel. Run, Max whispered to Maggie. Stay low, stay quiet, but run. They ran through the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls like the heartbeat off some giant underground creature. The maintenance lights threw weird shadows that danced and writhed like living things, and the air smelled of ozone and fear and something else Max couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe? The scent of a man who'd pushed his luck as far as it would go and was about to find out what happens when luck runs out. Behind them, the voices were getting closer. I know you're down here, Campbell. Ain't nowhere to run. Just send me the girl, and we can all walk away from this. Max pulled Maggie into a side tunnel, pressed his back against the wall. His heart was shammering in his chest, and he could feel Maggie's pulse racing against his palm where he held her hand. Listen to me, he whispered. If something happens to me, if we get separated, you keep running. Find a transit cop, find anybody in uniform, and you tell them who you are. You tell them about Uncle Bobby, and about Detective Morrison, and about me. Can you do that? Tears were running down Maggie's face, but she nodded. I don't want you to go away. I ain't planning on it, little angel. But sometimes plans change, and I need to know you're gonna be okay. The footsteps were closer now, maybe 50 yards back. Max could hear Torino talking to Samian, probably on a radio or cell phone that worked better than his did down here. Yeah, we got him cornered. Northeast. Tunnel. Section D. Send back up to the Lexington exit, in case they double back. Back up. More men, more guns, more ways for this to go bad. Max felt the weight of his service weapon against his ribs, counted the bullets in his head. 15 rounds, plus 1 in the chamber. Against how many men? 3, 4, maybe more. But then he looked at Maggie, saw the trust in her eyes, and knew he didn't have a choice. This child was counting on him, had chosen him over rich folks and comfortable homes and all the security that money could buy, had faith in a broken-down cop with a second mortgage and a gambling problem, and a heart, too, big for his own good. Sometimes that's all it takes to turn a man into a hero, someone believing in him when he don't believe in himself. Stay here, Max told Maggie. Stay quiet, stay hidden. I'll be right back. He moved back toward the main tunnel, toward the voices that were getting closer with every second. 3 men, just like he'd thought. Torino in the middle, flanked by 2 others who looked like they'd stepped out of central casting for generic. Thugs number 1 and 2. Max stepped into the light, weapon drawn but not aimed. Yet, Bobby Torino. The men stopped, surprised. They'd been hunting, but they hadn't expected their prey to come to them. Officer Campbell? Torino grinned, and Max saw madness in that smile. The kind of madness that comes from too many drugs and too much violence and too many nights staring into Thebes until the abyss starts staring back. Where's my girl? She ain't your girl. Never was. Torino's grin got wider, nastier. Oh, but she is. See, I invested time and money and effort into that little piece of merchandise. Trained her, conditioned her, made her into exactly what it needed. And just 'cause some bleeding heart cop gets lucky, don't mean I'm gonna write off my investment. Max felt rage building in his chest, hot and pure and righteous. She's a child. A little girl who deserves love and safety and a chance to grow up normal. You turned her into a drug mule, Yausik piece of. I turned her into profit. Torino's voice echoed off the tunnel walls, loud and harsh and full of poison. You think I'm the only one? You think she's the only one? I got a whole network, Campbell. Kids younger than her. Kids who ain't been contaminated by all your do-gooder bullshit. Kids who still know their place. One of the thugs shifted position, trying to flank Max from the right. Max adjusted his stance, kept this weapon ready, but not directly threatening, yet. It's over, Bobby. We found your operation, freed the other kids. They're safe now, getting the help they need. And Maggie's safe too. You lost, Torino laughed. Sound like broken glass in a blender. Lost? Oh, Campbell, you don't get it, do you? This ain't about one little girl. This is about respect. About what happens when somebody takes what belongs to me. He pulled a gun from his jacket, and Max saw his own death reflected in the barrel. Not a quick, clean cop death in the line of duty. Something messier, more personal. The kind of death that comes from crossing the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong place. Here's what's going to happen, Torino said. You're going to call that little girl out here. You're going to hand her over nice and peaceful like. And then you're going to walk away and forget this whole thing ever happened. Or what? Torino's grin turned feral. Or I put a bullet in your head and take her anyway. Your choice. Max thought about Maggie, hidden in the side tunnel, probably crying, and scared and wishing this nightmare would end. Thought about the promise he'd made to her, the one about never leaving, about always keeping her safe. Thought about his sister Sarah, vanished all those years ago, and wondered if she'd had Simeon to stand up for her when the monsters came calling. I got a better idea, Max said quietly. Why don't you go to hell? He raised his weapon, and the tunnel exploded into chaos. The first shot took down thug number 1 before he could clear his own gun from its holster. The second shot went wide, sparks flying off the tunnel wall as Torino dove for cover behind. A support pillar. Thug number 2 was faster, got off 3 shots before Max's third bullet found its mark. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Muzzle flashes strobing like lightning in a thunderstorm. Max felt something hot tear across his left shoulder, but he kept moving, kept shooting, kept putting himself between the monsters and the child, who trusted him to keep her safe. Torino was yelling something, curses and threats and promises of what he was going to do when he got his hands on Max. But his voice was getting farther away, like he was pulling back, regroups for another try. The shooting stopped. 2 men down, Torino somewhere in the darkness, wounded but not finished. Max could hear him breathing, could smell the blood and fear and desperation that filled the air like smoke. You can't protect her forever, Campbell. Torino's voice echoed from somewhere up ahead. You get all the time in the world, and you got nowhere to run. Max pressed his back against the wall, checked his shoulder. Just a graze, painful but not serious. He had maybe 10 rounds left, and no way of knowing how many men Torino had killed for backup. Behind him, in the side tunnel, he could hear Maggie crying. Soft, heartbroken sobs that cut through him like a knife. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This wasn't the fairy tale ending that children like Maggie deserved. But sometimes life ain't about getting what you deserve. Sometimes it's just about standing up to the monsters, even when you know you ain't gonna win. Max reloaded his weapon, took a deep breath, and prepared to make his last stand. That's when he heard the sirens. Asterisk. The sound came from above, muffled by concrete and steel, but unmistakably real. Police sirens, lots of them, converging on the area like angels with badges and bad attitudes. Torino heard them too. Max could hear him cursing, could hear the panic creeping into his voice as he realized his perfect plan was falling apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Backup's coming, Bobby," Max called out, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. NYPD, FBI, probably half the city by now. "You got maybe 5 minutes before this place is crawling with cops." "Shut up." Torino's voice was higher, now desperate. "You think I'm scared of some badge-wearing Boy Scouts? I've been dealing with cops since before you knew which end of a gun to hold." But Max could hear the fear underneath the bravado. Torino was trapped, wounded, and running out of options, which made him more dangerous than ever, like a cornered rat with nothing left to lose. The sirens were getting closer, and Max could hear something else now, voices, lots of them, echoing through the tunnel system. Transit cops, NYPD, maybe even federal agents. Some E&E had put out the call, mobilized half the city to find one lost child, and the broken-down cop who'd sworn to protect her got Max eased back toward the side tunnel, toward where Maggie was hiding. Found her pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face, clutching that teddy bear like it was the last solid thing in a world gone mad. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Not yet, little angel, but soon." Max could hear footsteps now, lots of them, coming from multiple directions. The cavalry had arrived, just like in the movies. Except this wasn't no movie, and there was still a chance everything could go sideways in the worst possible way. NYPD, drop your weapons. The voice belonged to Detective Morrison, amplified by a bullhorn and echoing off the tunnel walls like the voice of God himself. "We have the area surrounded. Come out with your hands visible." Torino laughed, but there wasn't no humor in it. Just the bitter sound of a man who'd played his last card and watched it lose. "You want the girl?" he yelled back. "Come and get her." That's when Max realized Torino wasn't giving up, wasn't surrendering or trying to cut a deal or looking for a way out. He was going to make one last play, and that play involved getting to Maggie before the cops could stop him. Max heard movement in the darkness, footsteps coming toward their position, fast and desperate and full of deadly purpose. "Stay down," he told Maggie, then stepped out into the main tunnel. Torino was maybe 20 yards away, moving fast, despite the blood running down his left arm dot. His gun was up and aimed, and his eyes had the flat, dead look of a man who'd already dead, wasn't walking out of this alive. "You took everything from me," he screamed. "My business, my reputation, my future. All for some worthless little—" Max's bullet cut him off mid-sentence, punched him backward into the tunnel wall. But Toronato'd go down, didn't stop coming. He fired twice, wild shots that went wide, then stumbled forward like a man possessed. Max fired again, center mass, textbook shot that should have dropped him instantly. But drugs and rage and pure desperate fury kept Torino on his feet, kept him moving toward the side tunnel where Maggie was hiding. That's when the tunnel filled with light and noise and armed officers yelling, commands that nobody was listening to anymore. Morrison was there, and Rosa Vasquez, and half a dozen cops that Max didn't recognize. Even Dr. Vasquez somehow, wearing scrubs and a bulletproof vest and an expression that said she'd walk through hell itself for one of her patients. They were too far away, and Torino was too close, and Max was out of bullets and options and time. Torino reached the side tunnel, saw Maggie pressed against the wall, and grinned that awful grin one last time. "Hello, Princess. Uncle Bobby's come to take you home." That's when Maggie did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stood up. 7 years old, barely 40 pounds soaking wet. But she stood up in that tunnel, like she wasn't feet tall and made of pure determination. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong and absolutely certain. "You're not my uncle. You never were. And this is my home now." She pointed at Max, who was reloading his weapon with shaking hands, trying to get between her and the monster who'd haunted her dreams for so long. "That's my daddy. And he's going to protect me from you." Torino's grin faltered. For just a moment, Max saw confusion in his eyes, like he couldn't understand how his perfect victim had turned into something he didn't recognize. "You belong to me," he said, but his voice was weaker now, uncertain. "I belong to me," Maggie said. "And I choose him." That's when Morrison's sniper took the shot. The bullet took Torino high in the chest, spun him around, and dropped him to the tunnel floor like a sack of garbage. He lay there for a moment, trying to speak, trying to raise his gun for one last act of spite. Then his eyes went flat and empty, and Robert Torino stopped being anyone's problem ever again. Max dropped his weapon, rushed to Maggie, swept her up in his arms, and held her like he was never going to let her go again. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his holder, and Max felt her small body shaken with sobs that seemed to come from some place deeper than tears. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's over, little angel. You're safe now." Morrison approached them slowly, holstered his weapon. "Hell of a thing, Campbell. Hell of a thing." Max looked up at the detective, saw something in his eyes that might have been respect, or maybe just relief that nobody else had to die in these tunnels. "How'd you find us?" Morrison grinned. "GPS tracker in your phone. Been monitoring your location since you called yesterday. When you went dark, we mobilized everything we had." "Everything?" Morrison gestured at the crowd of officers and federal agents and medical personnel that had somehow materialized in the tunnel. Task Force, FBI, Transit Authority, even the mayor's office got involved. "Turns out that little girl of yours made quite an impression on Judge Martinez. Shackled in every favor, she had to make sure we found you." Max looked around at all the people who'd come down into the darkness to save them. Cops and doctors, and lawyers and bureaucrats who dropped everything to help a child they'd never met, and a broken-down officer who'd bitten off more than he could chew. "Why?" he asked. Dr. Vasquez knelt down beside them, started checking Maggie for injuries with gentle practice settings. "Because sometimes," she said, "love is stronger than bureaucracy. And sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to." As they made their way back through the tunnels, back toward the light and the world above, Max felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just peace, but hope. Real hope, the kind that builds houses and plants gardens and believes in tomorrow. Even when today looks impossible. Maggie fell asleep in his arms somewhere between the tunnel and the ambulance, exhausted by fear and adrenaline and the simple relief of being safe. Max held her close, felt her breath warm against his neck, and made a promise to whatever force in the universe looked after lost children and broken-down cops. He was going to give this little girl the life she deserved, the life she'd chosen, the life they were going to build together, one day at a time, one promise at a time, one act of love at a time, because sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. One person choosing to love when it would be easier to walk away. One person standing up to the monsters when everyone else looks the other way. One person saying, "Not on my watch," and meaning it with everything they've got. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that's enough. 6 months later, Max was hammering shingles onto the roof of a small house in Queens when he heard the school bus pull up to the corner. He climbed down from the ladder, wiped cushions on his jeans, and watched Maggie come running up the sidewalk, with her backpack bouncing and her face bright with the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're home. "Max, Max, Look what I made in art class." She thrust a piece of construction paper at him, covered in crayon drawings and glitter, and fecund of artistic enthusiasm that only second graders can muster. It was a house, their house, with two figures standing in front of it. One big, one small, both smiling. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, just like the artist who made it." The house was small, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to cook together. But it had something Max's old apartment never did. Had windows, lots of them, and a front yard where Maggie could play, and neighbors who waved when they saw her riding her bicycle up and down the sidewalk. The adoption had been finalized 3 weeks ago, Judge Martinez presiding with tears in her eyes and a smile that could have powered the courthouse. Maggie had insisted on wearing Herbie's dress, the yellow one with flowers that she'd worn to court that first day, and Max had worn his dress uniform, the one he saved for funerals and ceremonies and moments that mattered more than words could. Say, "Do you, Maxwell Campbell, promise to love, protect, and provide for this child as your own daughter, for as long as you both shall live?" Max had looked down at Maggie, saw her grinning up at him with trust and hope and love shining in those eyes that weren't too old anymore, just right, just perfect. "I do, Your Honor, I promise." The Van Derlins had made one last attempt to contest the adoption, hired lawyers and filled motions, and threw around enough money to buy a small country. But public opinion had shifted against them like a tide, and even their high-powered legal team couldn't overcome the simple truth of what everyone could see, that this child belonged with the man who'd saved her, protected her, loved her when she needed it most. Harrison Van Derlin had shown up at the courthouse that final day, sat in the back row with his expensive suit and his bitter expression. After the judge's gavel fell and the adoption was official, he'd approached Max in the hallway. "This isn't over," he'd said, voice low and full of quiet menace. "People like you don't get to win against people like me." Max had looked him up and down, this man who thought money could buy love and influence could purchase happiness. "Mr. Van Derlin, with all due respect, you already lost. The day you decided that little girl was something to be owned instead of someone to be loved." The rich man had walked away without another word, and Max hadn't seen him since now, standing in their front yard with Maggie's artwork in his hands and the smell of sawdust impossibility in the air. Max felt something he'd never experienced before in his 43 years of life: completeness. The sense that all the broken pieces of his existence had finally found their way into the right configuration. "Did you fix the window in my room?" Maggie asked, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Max grinned. "Go see for yourself." She ran inside, and Max heard her feet thundering up the stairs, heard her squeal of delight when she saw what he'd done. The window in her bedroom, the one that faced east, toward sunrise now, had a window seat with cushions and pillows, a place where she could sit and read and watch the world wake up every morning. "It's perfect," she called down. "Just like in my drawing." Max looked at the crayon picture she'd made all those months ago in the hospital, the stick figures holding hands outside a house with one window. He'd had it framed, hung it in the living room where everyone could see it, a reminder of where they'd been and how far they'd come. His phone rang, and he saw Detective Morrison's number on the screen. "Campbell." "Max, it's Morrison. Got some news you might be interested in. Remember that task force wept together to track down Torino's network?" "Yeah? We got the last of them yesterday. Bust in Baltimore. Took down the whole East Coast operation. 14 arrests. 37 children recovered and returned to their families." Max felt a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying lift off his shoulders. "All of them?" "Every last one. Some of them are going to need years of therapy, years of healing. But they're free now. They're safe. And a big part of that is because you didn't walk away when it would have been easier. Because you stood up for one little girl who needed someone to believe in her. Max was quiet for a moment, watching Maggie through the window as she arranged stuffed animals on her new window seat. She stood up for herself, Morrison. I just gave her a safe place to do it. Maybe, but you should know word's getting around the department about what you did. There's talk of a commendation, maybe even a promotion. Seems like some folks downtown think you got what it takes to make detective. Max thought about that for a moment. Detective Campbell had a nice ring to it. Better pay, better hours, better chance of making a real difference in the world. I appreciate that, Morrison. I really do. But right now, I got more important things to worry about than promotions. Like what? Max watched Maggie come running back outside, her face bright with happiness and possibility. Like helping my daughter with her homework. Like teaching her to ride a bike without training wheels. Like being the kind of father she deserves. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what, Campbell? I think you already are. After he hung up, Max sat on his front steps and watched Maggie play in the yard. She was showing her teddy bear the flowers they'd planted together, explaining in great detail why daisies were better than roses and why butterflies were probably angels in disguise. Max? She looked up at him with those eyes that weren't too old anymore, just bright with curiosity and love. Are you happy? The question caught him off guard. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because it was the first time in his life the answer came so easily. Yeah, little angel, I'm happy. Are you? She nodded so hard her whole body shook. I'm happier than a butterfly in a flower garden. As the sun set over their little house in Queens, Max thought about all the roads that had led to this moment. All the mistakes and heartbreak and wrong turns that had somehow, miraculously, brought him to exactly where he needed to be. He thought about his sister Sarah, lost all those years ago, and wondered if she would have been proud of the man he'd become. Hoped that somewhere, somehow, she knew that her little brother had finally learned how to save someone who needed saving. He thought about the other children they'd rescued from Torino's network, about the families being reunited and the healing that was beginning, about the ripple effects of one act of kindness, one moment of choosing to care when it would have been easier not to. Most of all, he thought about Maggie, his daughter, his angel, his second chance at getting something right in this broken world, about the trust she'd placed in him and the love they'd built together, one day at a time, one promise at a time. Max? Maggie climbed onto his lap, curled up against his chest like a cat seeking warmth. Yeah, sweetheart? Tell me the story again, about how you found me in the subway. Max wrapped his arms around her, felt her heart beating against his ribs, steady and strong and absolutely alive. Well, he said, his voice taking on the rhythm of bedtime stories and fairy tales, there once was a little girl who got lost in the dark. And there once was a police officer who was lost too, in a different kind of way. And then what happened? Max smiled, looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. And then they found each other. And they realized that sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones you choose. Maggie was quiet for a moment, thinking about this. And they lived happily ever after? They lived, Max said, meaning it with everything he had. And they were happy, and they took care of each other. And that's the most important part of any story. As they sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their neighborhood staying in for the night, Max felt something he'd been searching for his entire life without even knowing it. Peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you're meant to do, with exactly the person who matters most. In the distance, a subway train rumbled through the underground arteries of the city, carrying its cargo of dreams and hopes, and late-night workers heading home to their families. But Max and Maggie didn't hear it. They were too busy being a family themselves, writing their own story, one day at a time. And if you listened real close, you might hear something that sounded like angels singing. But it was probably just a father humming a lullaby to his daughter. In the front yard of a little house with windows that caught the starlight and held it like promises waiting to come true.